Hi, I'm Thomas Belasco from Lower Cape May Regional High School in Cape May County, New Jersey. The lesson you're about to see is a 12th grade advanced placement literature class, and it is the culmination of our poetry unit. We have been working throughout the semester. They were asked to choose a poet, look up 5 or 6 of their poems that reflect around a certain theme. From that, they were to do an explication where they pull out that theme as it's represented in the poetry in a 7 to 10 page paper. Because it's the end of the year and teaching seniors, and obviously the attention span begins to wane, this is a lesson that models what they're going to do for the rest of the year. Each one of the students will choose one of the poems that they read for their paper, or a poem they just encountered otherwise, and teach that poem to the class. So what you're going to see is a Walt Whitman poem. It's a part of Song of Myself. It's the final chapter, chapter 52. We've already read an earlier chapter, so this kind of matches up those two. I'm going to introduce it with a bit of a video clip that will be from a Dead Poet Society movie in which they look at the idea of the barbaric yawp. So ideally you'll see some communication from the students, not just on the analytical terms of the poet, but also on an emotional connection to the poetry. Because I think as an English teacher, especially an AP English teacher, it's easy to fall into the trap of the AP test and a score on the AP test, but we can never lose sight of the idea of teaching students to appreciate and to love literature, to love reading, to appreciate poetry in all its forms, not just poetry from books, but the lyrics to songs and how that all fits in. So you should see a class that has fairly open communication. The kids are willing to share with one another, with the teacher, connections not just to the page, but what comes off the page, to their own lives, to how we experience poetry. As I look back at the lesson itself, I think the communication went extremely well where we went through. One of the things that I always look at is I've started with a movie clip, I've used song to start movie, but I really question maybe I could bring in more artwork, or I could try to look at other modalities of learning so that some kids who are more visual learners, if I give them something that's art, that would work a little bit better. Having said that, I really still feel pretty confident that the objectives for this lesson were met. At times you heard direct references to the poem and their ability to see symbols and things that were represented within the poem. You also are going to see them make connections to their own lives, especially to the hawk soaring and living in a shore community and our experience with nature. So the two major objectives I had were an understanding of literature and the elements of literature, and then also to see how poetry lives in our lives every day, and they were both met.
Stretch it, it'll never be enough. Kick at it, beat it, it'll never cover any of us. From the moment we enter crying to the moment we leave dying, it'll just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream.
So at that point,
before I let you go, kids like to act. You know, it was something. But
what is a barbaric yawp?
We were shooting the scene and you wrote, I sound.
What is it? What's your barbaric yawp?
Just doing anything that comes to your mind.
Give me an example.
Like not caring. I don't like brushing your hair so it looks like this.
Okay. Anyone else? A barbaric yawp in your life?
Cursing when you stub your toe.
All right. So what kind of things are we getting into?
Like emotions,
Yeah.
my emotions.
Impulses.
Passion.
Passion, impulse, emotion. So if we look at the final section from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, we'd already looked at the opening, so we looked at chapter 6, when a child asked what grass was. And now we come to where it's going to come to a close. And after all of this writing, where does Walt Whitman take himself and his lesson? So if somebody wants to pick up, let's read the first part of section 52.
The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslated.
I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me.
It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds. It coaxes me to the vapor and to the dust.
I despair as air. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags.
I bequeath myself to the dirt, to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles.
You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good help to you nevertheless.
And filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me, at first keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stopped somewhere waiting for you. Now, if we look at this, even bit by bit, I think a lot of you can pick up, because if you look at that very first line, you're lucky enough to live in an area where that might happen to you. Like, how many of you have ever just been out on the nature trail? You've been out at Cape May Point, you've been walking, and you become so immersed in what's around you that you become a part of nature.
Yeah.
What's it feel like?
Think you belong somewhere.
Yeah. Like, how much do you lose the confines of here, social media, everything that takes place, and just feel peace?
It feels more real.
Mm-hmm. So here you have Walt Whitman, who's taken a walk, and a spotted owl comes by and complains that he's just loitering, that he's just hanging out. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. What's untranslatable? What does it mean to be untranslatable?
You can't
Misunderstood.
translate it.
Okay, in what way though? In what
can't
way?
read it.
How do we try to translate you?
To like fit you into
Get a
the
beat
things
on
that
it.
you
Conform.
know.
Like
Yeah.
label.
Like, if you and sadly, isn't high school about that in so many ways? Like, don't people make assessments and judgments of who you are based on,
What they know.
oh, you're in the play, you must be this way, or oh,
Christine's crazy hair.
you have crazy hair, or you're a runner, so you must be this way. And we don't really allow a person to be fully understood. You know, and if you look back at 51, which I gave you to look at, that is one of my all-time favorite lines he ever wrote, where it's, well, very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. You know, the idea that each one of us,
There's more than what you see.
yeah,
And you can contradict yourself because you have so many different parts of you.
yeah, one day I might want to do this, and another day I might want to do this. I'm different people. And then you get that famous line, I sound my barbaric yelp over the rooftops of the world. Some of us may not want to, because some of us might just like to remain quiet. But how many of us in some way want to someday sound our barbaric yelp? Don't you want to be known? Come on.
Yeah.
You don't somewhere want people to know who you are.
That's probably why we have social media and why we have like.
But what's the problem with sounding your barbaric yelp on social media?
It's not who you really are.
Yeah.
Superficial.
We go back to being translatable, where,
Yeah, you're trying to fit into something that isn't
Yeah.
exactly right.
I mean, I know none of you have ever done this, but here's my image of a barbaric yelp, because I'm guilty of this one. How many of you have ever been driving alone in your car, and a song comes on that you love, and you just sing at the top of your
I do that
lungs?
every day.
Yeah.
I did that when I
And I'm great at it, too.
Did you really?
Yeah.
But that's your barbaric yelp, because that's you really expressing yourself. Because if you're like me, I would never sing publicly, although I have once. But I really would avoid it at all costs, because I am not good. I did karaoke once, and I did the school play once. I've gotten tricked into both. And I think once was enough. I've exhausted it. We continue on. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wild, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. Yeah.
What's that?
If you look at the scud, the last remains, like almost scum, like the remnants of the day.
Dregs.
Yeah.
The sun, like the end of the sunset.
So where is he in his life?
Dying.
He's at the end of his life.
Yeah, but why does he say? Why does he like end with that? I stopped somewhere waiting for you. Wait, he's talking to us. But why does he end with that?
Because
Is there more chapters or is this the last one?
this is the last chapter.
Oh, okay.
Because once I go, What's my hope in life? How do I remain?
That you're known,
That
like
people
even after you
remember you.
die, you live on.
Your
Yes.
legacy.
And even maybe better than that, not only do I live on, which is my ego wanting to live on, but more importantly, what happens to my values and the things I respect?
That
They
other
live
people
on.
live them on.
They live on through other people. Like one of the things I tell people all the time, because obviously death is a really weird thing to look at, and from every time you've seen my counter, obviously death is something that doesn't freak me out as much as it should. But like I look at my father's death and I don't really look at it because like he lives on through me. Like I have his values. I've taught my children, I've instilled in him the things that he taught me. That's what Whitman's asking us at the end. Can you do that? Can you take that untranslatable you and as the poet, he sounded his y'all. Now he wants you to pick it up and do the same thing. Be true to yourself.
That second to last line too, missing me one place, searching another. He's missing on earth, like his physical being is gone, but searching another, you can find he's still alive to other people.
Yep. Where else are you going to find him, luckily?
Poetry.
Yeah, his words.
Yeah.
I mean, he's that guy that's got all these words that are set up somewhere that exist, so that's a beautiful thing.
Philadelphia Bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he got lucky because he did this. A lot of people don't have a way to leave it.
With their legacy. Or they do in other ways that aren't art.
I mean,
Yeah,
they
like
do, but a lot of
Yeah,
people
through
don't.
other-
Like through songs and through, you know, the laws we pass or through like teaching, whatever you
Like
do.
their
but
kids.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
just their values of
True.
that they taught other people.
So if we're careful, don't we all have a way to do this? Even if we're not famous?
yeah.
I mean, that's the thing we have to look at. Like, every one of us has this gift. We don't have to be a published poet. We don't have to own the world for this to happen. We just have to impart what's important to us to the people around us. And that's what Whitman's asking us to do here. And the good news is, like he told us in the chapter before, it doesn't matter if you change your mind. And you could be a different person yesterday than you were today. As long as you're true to what you believe when you believe it, it becomes really effective. I just want to pick up one last piece, and then we can kind of let it go. But if you remember from 6, because we read that earlier, the idea of the child asking, what is grass? And the line that was really cool about it was like the hair of the people who have died.
Yeah.
And we come down here to that same thing. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. You know, eventually what's going to happen to each one of us?
And then
Yeah.
He finally
His hair is
answered his
in
own
the ground.
question.
Oh, like what? Yeah.
And this has become more real than he's ever known, because I was just reading now in a western state is the first, I can't remember which one it is. I want to say it's Oregon because they're always pretty up on things. They're the first state that's allowing human composting. So that you could actually compost your body and then that,
More literal
you
sense.
literally will have grass
Yeah.
growing up
Oh,
from your
that's
remains.
I fused my flesh in eddies. What is?
Yeah, I was just thinking.
What are eddies and lacy
Eddies
jets?
are like tide going in and out, like the water. Like I
Isn't
don't
that
know.
ebb?
No, they're eddies. Like
Really?
Like
Ed-
circles of like water, kind of.
ebbs and flows is what you're thinking of, where the tide comes in and out. But eddies are where you get a small little area of water,
They're a little
would be an
whirlpool.
eddy. Probably anyone's ever been to the Cove, the tidal pool that none of you should have ever been swimming in, because now that as an adult you know why it was always so warm.
Ew.
That was an eddy. Like that's where you get these small little areas. But so the idea there is,
And filter the blood thing. What
What's
about
that?
And filter the blood thing. What does that mean?
where go.
Like
The
Filter
five,
fibers.
yeah.
Fiber.
But I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood, failing to fetch me at you first encouraged. Aside from, if you think about blood, obviously other than the simple liquid, if I said to you something is a lifeblood, what is it?
It's going to keep it going.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be physically your blood. Could you say music is my lifeblood? Like if I could. So I want to be that for you. I want to be that passion that inspired you.
This is a good one.
Yeah. Like and there's a reason.
Might be the perfect way to end a poetry book.
There's a reason I went back and told you that there's 2 reasons that I do this. Hunter S. Thompson, his writing inspired me to love writing.
Yeah.
and his poetry, because if you go through this whole, someday look at this whole book, his poetry is very raw. And I don't mean raw in unedited, I mean raw in emotion. He just wrote, Walt Whitman wrote what he felt. And if it changed day to day, it changed day to day, but he just wrote exactly what he felt. When asked to look at the biggest problem facing education today, it sort of fell in line with the way my own thinking has been evolving probably over the past 5 or 6 years. I initially went into teaching an AP Lit class and was very test-oriented and success-oriented. And while I still thrive to see the students do well, I found that it's become much more important to look at the whole student and not just to look at a test or not just to look at one classroom. Students today are bringing so many problems to the classroom that most teachers are unaware of if we really don't look deeply. They have stresses that evolved from childhood experiences. I've seen an increase in anxiety and depression and everything that brings with it. In addition to that, teachers are starting to show some of these same symptoms as they're going through a much more stressful environment. So this past summer, I had the opportunity, thanks to my school district, to attend a resiliency workshop, which was a 3-day workshop where we looked at adverse childhood experiences and techniques we could do to help kids learn to self-regulate when they're going into explosive situations or just frustrating situations with teachers or their classmates. Additionally, I've enrolled in a 2-year mindfulness certification program, and I've been lucky enough to start bringing that back into my school this year with a group we founded with a couple students called Mindfulness Over Matter, where we've utilized mindfulness, yoga, and art in order to help them express themselves and express their frustrations and find ways to channel some of the things that are bothering them today. Along with that, next year I'd like to expand that, and I see a morning session for teachers to help them, one, create a sense of community and a tribe among the teachers, and two, to better help them learn to calm down in stressful situations and, importantly, regulate themselves before they have to deal with the child in front of them.